Our next speaker served in key leadership positions in light, airborne, mechanized, and special operations formations over the last 28 years. He has operations and combat tours in Iraq, Qatar, Germany, and Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce the Commanding General of the 82nd Airborne Division, Major General Chris Donahue.
Hey, thanks for that introduction. Every time you see that, you always have to get a kick if you don't have the opportunity to laugh at yourself a little bit with those. But as a former Chief of Infantry, I know what it's like down there for you guys to set all this up. So to Pat and the rest of the team, thanks for doing this. Hey, as we looked at the previous briefers, I know we were going to kind of focus on airborne lethality, and we will touch on that. But I think really, as I looked at what the chief said, the Force Comm commander, and even Pat Donahue's comments up front, really what I wanted to do, I think, is just kind of talk about how we're trying to bring everything that was just described and actually be able to go out and execute that on a daily, monthly, and kind of annual basis. So the first thing is for the 82nd, it's pretty easy what our job is. The first is obviously we are the division headquarters, and then we have a brigade that is standing ready to deploy in 18 hours. So that's the first thing, and then the other one is to prepare to go out and fight in a LISCO environment against all the adversaries that have been described already. So really the way we kind of go after that is through our lines of effort, which, you know, I know everyone out there does that. And then out of that, we'll be able to kind of talk about where our challenges are with lethality, and then just other things too, because I think, you know, General Donahue specifically talked about how we're changing, how we're trying to match that change out here as well. So the first thing is our first line of effort is what we call is, you know, basically, and for everyone else's words, is unbeatable squads, sections, and crews. So in other words, we've mastered the basics, just like the Force Comm commander said. If we do not master the basics, it does not matter. We cannot do anything else. And part of that also is training management. And I will touch on that a couple of different times, but just as he highlighted, training management, I will tell you, is an area that I think across our Army we have to get better at, to give predictability, to actually have the time to master the basics and take care of our people. The second line of effort is to deploy, fight, and win anywhere in 18 hours. And that goes into many things that were described by both the Force Comm commander and the Chief of Staff of the Army. So the first one is we have to go out very rapidly and plug into many of the combative commands, work with allies and partners, and then we have to put ourselves onto a readiness cycle where we can actually match that and make sure that we have the time to train. And there's a number of exercises that we'll be doing that will force us to actually do that, whether it's we'll do back-to-back JRTC rotations where we'll plug in as a division headquarters for a portion of it. We'll go out to EUCOM and plug into Swift Response and work with allies, and then Defender Pacific next summer. And then also we will be the division headquarters for Project Convergence, which will then really leads us into the next LU, which is transform the division. And that's really now where we start to take, the first two are really what we do for Force Comm every day. And this next LU is really taking all these modernization efforts, but then also other efforts, and make sure that we are actually building that capability to fight in, as the Army calls it, that MUO environment or the all-domain environment. And that's really at echelon. The first is at the division level, and then obviously down at the lowest levels. And many of the modernization efforts that are underway, whether it's ITN, mobile protective firepower, the infantry squad vehicle, TCN, light in particular, and then future unmanned aerial systems, we have a very big play in that, as well as IVAS, and then 1st Brigade will also bring in ENVGB. So a tremendous amount of modernization going on. But to do modernization, even more importantly, you have to divest of things. And so as we look at transform the division, it's not only just at that lowest level, giving all of our squad sections and crews that incredible capability that's being developed. It's also about divesting as much as humanly possible. And then at the division level, it's really, we're at that fulcrum point there where we have to be able to transition from really what I would argue is we're still analog, but move over to a data-driven decision making. And we're part of a pilot that will do that, and ultimately take all of our current systems and do the pick and shovel work and put all that onto a single pane of glass so that we can start to see that data and make decisions. And then also all the things that Army Futures Command, the acquisition community, and the Army are developing is to make sure that we can actually plug them into a system where we can fight all of that. So in other words, take all the systems that General McConville talked about, and then take a thing like IVAS and plug all that capability together and truly be able to fight off of that. That's really the key part of that. And then the last thing is what we call is live the legacy. And the reason we highlight that is that, you know, as commanders here, we have really kind of two moral objectives. The first is to make sure that all of our people are taken care of, like they're somebody's kid, dad, mom, etc., to make sure that we are actually taking care of our people. And then the other way of taking care of them is to make sure that whenever they deploy to combat, they are ready to go and they can fight, win, and survive. And then pulling in all that rich history that every division has, and obviously we are doing that here from an 82nd perspective. And then even when you look at, we talk about taking care of the families, as you know, the Force Com commander discussed, General Garrett, specifically about families. I will tell you, historically, we've all grown up with FRGs where they focus on the wife, the family of people here, and we do not engage with the families, the parents specifically, that much. You know, I took over in the middle of July, and I will tell you, I've spent more time engaging with parents over the last you know, month and a half than I have with wives or anyone else. Generally speaking, wives and families are very well informed. It's actually the parents that we are pulling into our FRGs to make sure that they are part of that. And then the other thing too, the reason we very specifically say live the legacy is there are a number of things that are happening out there, right? We know that suicides are on the increase across both our society, but also the Army. And this really goes into, as General Garrett calls it, the corrosives of sexual assault, sexual harassment, suicide. You know, let's be completely honest with each other. There are some ethnic tensions that are out there. Clearly, we want to keep that out of our ranks. But all that really kind of goes into live the legacy. So that's how we're trying to take all the things that have been discussed and actually go through and prioritize them and actually give them the time that General McConville talked, or General McConville, and then also General Garrett talked about, the absolute time to make sure that we're solving those problems. And that's a heck of a lot to put together there across all those lines of effort. But then specifically to go back, what was really the main discussion point here of lethality within an airborne IBCT and division. So the first thing is manning. All of our artillery crews are manned at minimal amount. A lot of our low density but high demand MOSs are also manned at a very low level, just because as we try to get them through airborne school and get them to this division, and then obviously the two other airborne brigades that are out there. And then the other key piece here is our Delta companies. So really those two are the key entities that give us the vast majority of our lethality. And then all the modernization efforts that we talked about, whether it's IVAS, some of the systems that we're putting on rifles right now that we're fielding to increase our lethality, they're extremely important. But we're also going to put in a ONS for a capability like an XM25 to ultimately have that capability at the squad level, direct fire, that can end firefights. And that is the key thing that we need for our squads is the ability to end firefights. And at the company level and battalion level, we have that with our Delta companies, and then obviously with the artillery. So that is the key kind of lethality things that we are focused on here in the 82nd specifically. And then, you know, manning is a extremely important portion of all of that. So I'll stop there. I know, you know, this portion here, you know, is a little bit shorter than the rest of them. But what I would like to do is go out to questions. And then the other portion that we're doing that's not unique to lethality, but I do want to highlight, is mobile protective firepower. We will do the soldier assessment and the limited user test here starting in January. I know there's several questions about how we think we're going to employ mobile protective firepower, MPF. So I'll stop there and go out to the field for any questions.
Good morning, sir. This is Colonel Chris Budas, Chief of Staff at Fort Benning. Sir, how do you read the station?
Hey, I got you good audio.
All right, sir. Sir, the first question from the field is the following. 10 years ago, the Army was challenged by the high op tempo to support both operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Are we now getting at the BCT level and below the right amount of time to get the requisite reps and sets in to be proficient in our tactical task?
Yeah, one, that's a very good question. And the reason I say that is the first one is, you know, really out of the world. I do think we're going to start to get more time at the BCT level. I think, you know, while we were talking, I just saw an email flash up that General McKenzie, the CENTCOM commander, just announced that we will have additional troop reduction in Iraq and Syria. So the requirement for BCTs to deploy to Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan is clearly going to go down over the next several months. In fact, today we're receiving back from our 2nd Brigade 200 individuals, and we'll receive 300 other soldiers here in the next couple of weeks. So from a patch chart, I think just naturally we're going to buy that back. Now, clearly we have the rotations out to Atlantic Resolve and to Korea, but just by slowing that tempo down, we should have more time. But then in the overarching question is, do we have enough time to train with our brigade combat teams at the basics? I would, at least I can only speak for this division. We don't have enough time yet, but we're getting there. And as General Garrett talked about, very specifically, our training management has to get better across the force. And that's probably, so by reducing the requirements and getting better at training management, that'll be the first thing. The other thing too is we talked about of transform the division, of reducing all of our excess equipment. The amount of time, you know, when I was a DCG out of 4th ID, we spent an inordinate amount of time reducing equipment, and we are still doing the same. So the Secretary of the Army was down here, and we very specifically brought this factor up to him of, hey, these are the areas that are killing us with time across our brigade combat teams, and turning in that excess and doing the lateral transfers. And then while you're modernizing, that is very difficult. And that goes back to, you have to be ruthless in your training management to balance all of those. So I'll stop there and see if there's any follow-on questions to that.
Sir, the next question from the field is the following. How do you see integrating ITN and IVAS into data-enabled airborne forces to evolve joint force entry operations?
So I guess the first thing is for IVAS and ITN, even just kind of forget airborne forces. The first thing is we have to all systems, which I know Dave Hodney, AFC, and the rest of the acquisition community is working on very, very, one, in a sound way. They're making sure that we have the right data architecture set up to do that with being able to compute at the edge. And a guy named Colonel Chris Schneider is really kind of pioneering that at the edge capability to make sure that we have that. So that's the first thing, is we have to get that right, so that we have that capability out there to do that. IVAS will clearly be very important. ITN will be important, but really everything that we develop going forward into the future will start to do that. And if we can talk a little bit more specificity of why we need to do that if there's a follow-on question. But then as you look at it from why does that matter for an airborne operation in a JFE, a Joint Force Entry operation, is really we're putting the nodes onto aircraft so that we can communicate and get real-time updates while we're en route to a potential airborne operation. So really, once that individual paratrooper gets onto the aircraft, time stops for them, but the situation will clearly continue to change. So ITN, that end user device for where we're going and fighting, it will be able to receive updates from those nodes that are on aircrafts, across the aircraft, so that now our paratroopers are getting updates real time, and in particular right before they go out of the aircraft, to make sure they know the situation on the ground.
So our next question from the field is, sir, you breached the subject of divestiture. What activities are you looking to either cease or reduce at the 82nd Airborne?
So the first thing is we have to task organize. So before we even get into that, we actually have to task organize to make sure that we have the appropriate resources in place to actually allow our brigades to divest. In other words, it has to be a division level operation. If we just continue to let the brigades do it on their own, they do not have enough 92 series in particular, or enough time to actually do that. So the first thing is we have to plan it out from a division level of how we're going to reduce all this excess, and then also divest of things that we're modernizing. We just got the new modular handgun. So how are you handing in M9s as you're maintaining alert posture? And then how are you receiving, the new M17? So something as simple as a pistol will end up becoming much more complicated than it probably should be. So that brigade, we can't ask it to all. And then things won't get to that readiness cycle that we talked about. Is that so? Here in the 82nd, it will be a little bit easier for us because you will have a brigade that's on alert, a brigade that's next up for alert, and then a brigade that is basically recovering from coming off of alert. So we will build into that cycle when you will be the priority for divestiture, and then when you will be the priority for training. So that now we can start to balance when you do that, because you cannot effectively modernize, divest, and train at the same time. And so that'll be the approach that we're going to take. We have a little bit more freedom to do that than other units, just based off of that cycle that we will be on. So I'll pause there if there's any follow-ups to that.
Sir, no follow-ups. The next question from the field is, how do you visualize the utilization of the mobile protective firepower platforms into initial entry operations and then follow-on operations as part of the GFA activities? Sir, can you hear the station? General Donahue, radio check, over. Everybody on that, just stand by, working through some comms issues.
Just comm check with you guys.
Sir, can you hear me now? General Donahue, radio check, over. Sir, radio check.
Hey, I just want to do a quick count check.
Sir, can you hear us now?
Okay. Hey, I just want to do a quick. You guys have us now?
Sir, can you hear us now?
Okay. Yeah, I think we're back. Sorry, we had some buffering issues.
All right, sir.
Hey, so back to the on MPF. So the first thing with MPF is one, written into the requirement is not for it to be airborne droppable. So we think technology will probably move forward in the future so that it is capable either of the two variants that are left. We will be able to get to a point where you can airdrop either one of them that ultimately could be employed. So again, we will not evaluate that in this soldier evaluation and then limited user test. But clearly we would like that capability going into the future. But again, right now is not part of the requirement. So we would see that air landing as part of the first air land package that we would bring in. But just across the IBCTs, clearly the mobile protective firepower is going to be used, and from those that have served in the 82nd or some other formations that have had this type of capability in the past. It'll be a battalion level at the division level. Each company will have a habitual relationship with each of the maneuver brigades. And then ultimately, the reason they're not being called tanks, even though if you look at them, you'd think they were a tank, is that one, we don't want to fight them like tanks, but rather we will use them as that capability to come up and help set the conditions for assaults, ultimately going forward. So that's the direction that we are testing them. Again, is that they will come up and they will support infantry in the assault. And then we will go through a series of tests over, starting in January for the next 6 to 7 months after that. So I'll pause there if there's any other questions on MPF.
And with sir, our next question. Our next question, sir, from the field is the following. How can the Army Futures Command Synthetic Training Environment Team potentially support the 82nd Airborne Division in their readiness now and in the future?
Yeah, so the first thing is, one, IVAS is really the end user device that we'll be using into the future for that synthetic training environment that they describe. And if you're tracking what Dave Hodney, General Potts up in PEO Soldier and what they're doing, pretty remarkable stuff. So right now we know we can come in using IVAS and we can, conduct room clearing, anywhere just with, if you have the right Wi-Fi capability. So one, again, you can do that right now. So, but let's go back and kind of back out. What is the purpose of IVAS? The first thing of IVAS is it is to provide us overwhelming advantage both day and night against any adversary. okay? But also it is a digital capability, and that makes it much more easily upgradable. So if you look at the tubes that are on your current, capability that people are wearing out there from, whether it doesn't matter what system it is, even ENVGB, that's basically 1950s technology, and you cannot get any more out of that tube. So ultimately, we've moved over to the digital capability. So it'll be much lighter, easily upgradable, and also ultimately be significantly cheaper. So again, it is about dominance over top of our enemy, both day and night. Also, the thermal capability that is added to IVAS, like ENVGB, that now gives you a daytime capability and also a subterranean capability. So again, groundbreaking overmatch capability. Then whenever you throw in the rest of what IVAS is going to be able to do, so that Microsoft capability, that now we can start bringing in synthetic training. So whenever we start talking about reps and sets and everything else, you can now put your IVAS on. You can put a scenario up in your own barracks, someone else's barracks, the motor pool, and you can now go through and start to conduct room clearing operations as you're doing that. And then as this thing continues to mature, I mean, ultimately you're going to be able to integrate this into other training, whether it's squad live fire, platoon, company, et cetera. You can start bringing in air threats and everything else. But we're still pretty far away from that. But it is coming much quicker than I think people truly understand as that capability continues to get developed. But for mastering the basics, the initial version that comes out will be able to do that. And then whenever you just get into the other portion of it, as you prepare, so that's training, but then as you prepare to go to combat and all the stuff that, AFC is working on and the acquisition community, you'll be able to import all that terrain, video, and everything else of areas where you're going to go and fight. And you'll now be able to conduct rehearsals on the same ground before you ever get there. So that'll be I know we're not quite there yet on version 1. It probably won't be exactly where we want it to be, but again, in short order, that will be coming out pretty quickly. And then as you look at the other capabilities that are coming in, whether it's as you want to reduce staff sizes, we talked about how we have that edge compute, all that capability that you're going to take with you. Staffs eventually are going to be able to use this to plan as well. If you were truly fighting against a China, Russia, et cetera, being able to fight and survive and make your signature very small, IVAS is going to be the backbone for that as well eventually. So let me stop there. I know that was a pretty long answer about where we're going to train, how that use and others are going to be able to be used.
So our next question is the following. As an imperative operate in multi-domains expand, how should reconnaissance security organizations at echelon be resourced to increase their capability to answer PIR effectively to allow commanders decision space?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is whenever we look across the board of how we think we're going to conduct reconnaissance, and this kind of goes back to data and everything else, is that we have to start figuring out how we're going to do reconnaissance at echelon and what is really required. So whenever we talk about bringing in data architecture, there's, as everyone knows, there's multiple, whatever you want to call it, scraping systems and everything else that are starting to get information back from social media and telling us and informing us of what is going on. Now, clearly the enemy will try to and do things we're going to do them. But whenever you really get into looking at the data and getting into segmentation, you're going to be able to start to look at that. So that's going to start to become an ISR platform as well. It already is, really. So we've already started to do that with things like Gray Plan IO and some other capabilities that are out there. The other thing is that from an aerial perspective, and if you've heard the Secretary of the Army or the Chief of Staff of the Army talk about low orbit satellites are going to start here, in the next several years to be a capability that definitely brigades, and that information will get pushed down, is going to be able to be part of someone's ISR plan. And then as you start to look at, as we continue to develop all of those capabilities, everything that we develop should become a sensor. So then you have to make sure that you can tie all of that together, which is probably the most difficult part. So that's just kind of the modernization portion of it. But then at the end of the day, we have to have that reconnaissance, because the enemy, like anything we build, the enemy at echelon will figure out how to take that away from us, though. And there will be moments in time when you'll have it and times when you won't. And you know, we're looking at the enemy right now, and we're trying to figure out how we're taking their advantages away. They're going to do the same to us. So that reconnaissance element that we will develop across the board, whether that's at the battalion, brigade, or ultimately at the division level, is only going to become more and more important as our adversaries figure out how to take away some of that technical stuff. But our reconnaissance efforts have to be able, and elements have to be able to leverage all those capabilities that we just talked about. And that's really that kind of modernization effort that we're doing to move forward. But extremely important that we bring it back at the division level, and that we get better at it at the brigade and battalion level. Let me pause there if there's any follow-ups on that.
So our next question is the following. Are we evolving the CTCs fast enough to meet your airborne division's ability to realistically fight a near-peer competitor threat environment?
I mean, we'll find out in February and March. One thing I would tell you is, you know, we go down to JRTC for back-to-back rotations, but Brigadier General Pat Frank and his team down there have done remarkable work to allow us to do just that. I think the one thing the CTCs do not probably do well enough for us right now, and by the way, it's not the purpose for them either, is that that joint force entry of how we truly integrate in the Air Force and how we think we would actually execute a JFE if we were to do it, you know, pick some island in the Pacific, somewhere in Europe, you know, it doesn't really matter where. But how do we replicate that? And that's not JRTC's job, okay? So at the end of the day, JRTC exists to make our brigades down to squads better, not so much to work the JFE. But I think there's probably other places we need to go out and work on that first before we take it to a place like JRTC or NTC or, you know, even out to JMRC. But ultimately, we do have to figure out how to do that going forward to make it a truly viable option against the near peer. But again, you know, I'm a firm believer that JRTC exists to train brigades down to squads. Now, they can help out. I know NTC is doing a rotation coming up with 1 AD, as General Garrett discussed. Very important about how we try to push and potentially, you know, bring the division in and make that better. We're going to do that. And we're going to command and control ultimately our 2 brigades in those back-to-back rotations for the first 24, 48 hours and try to test some of that at division level capability that we're trying to develop right now. So a long answer, you know, but we got to preserve what those training centers do best, and then figure out how we're going to train that capability. Again, working very closely with the Air Force. I'll pause there if there's any follow-ups.
So our next question is the following. How do you envision sustaining your force in the fight while conducting decentralized multi-domain operations in a contested environment which may have contested airspace? How do you envision the use of unmanned platforms to assist in that capability?
In short, yes. And you know, it's no, we're preparing for a warfighter right now, and you know, as we look at the viability of a airborne operation or a deep air assault, and then understanding the way the enemy is going to try to disrupt what we're trying to accomplish, that does become our, you know, our Achilles heel, which everybody out there knows, is how do we sustain ourselves and make it so that that force can survive. So we do assess that UAS going forward. Again, not there quite yet. And then just other capabilities like that, whether it's unmanned vehicles, et cetera, to reinforce, but then also conduct resupply and maintain that force. But that is what I would argue one of the areas we have to, if we're going to have to figure out here in the next several years.
Sir, and our last question is the following. What steps are you looking to take to lighten paratrooper load as we continue to add essential equipment to airborne forces?
So I think I know if you were to talk to PEO Soldier and Dave Hodney, this is absolutely one of the key things. And I know when we were working these things, anything that we introduce right now to the squad, it has to come in lighter than anything that presently exists, or it takes in the aggregate, whenever you add everything together that is capable of doing, it comes in lighter than any of the current things. So that's the first thing. But to go back just philosophically, if you were to look at an F-35, an aircraft carrier, or even an M1 tank, we look at that as a platform. And we have to look at the squad as a platform, okay? And once we started looking at the squad as a platform, then we were able to look across, okay, what capabilities does that squad need to truly understand what's going on, be able to see whatever it needs to see, and then kill things very quickly, and then also make sure that we're ending firefights and not, just basically sustaining firefights. And all those capabilities are what you're seeing start to roll out right now. But again, then we have to come back and we have to look at what the next version of stuff is. And CFT lethality there with Dave Hodney, General Potts up there at PEO Soldier, they're all looking at what those next capabilities are and what we're going to need. But I would just tell you, if you look at just our body armor alone, and anyone who's been to Korea, that was my first assignment. If you were to take our body armor today and think that we're going to sustain a combat operation and walk up and down the hills of Korea wearing that, that is wildly unrealistic. Okay, we will not be doing that. So we have to lighten the load of how we protect ourselves, all the equipment, and then treat that squad as a platform and make sure that we are, again, reducing the weight, and then ultimately we have to reduce the amount of power that is required to run all the systems that we're talking about, because the ones that we are bringing in, they are consolidating several things together, but that is one of the risks as we continue to modernize, is that we're increasing power, and we have to get that under control. And by the way, the team that's working that is doing a great job to do that. And I think when it's all said and done, that'll probably become a wash from a power perspective and will be lighter. But we have to continue to drive it. Our body armor has to get significantly lighter pretty quickly. So I'll pause there if there's any follow-ups.
Sir, thank you for your presentation. Any final remarks?
No, the one I know just on behalf of General Kurilla, who wasn't able to make it today, and I became the fill-in, just thanks for the time to talk. Again, I just wanted to kind of talk to everybody about how, as we're trying to manage all of this, it's not as simple as, everyone puts onto a slide, but really, how do we master and make sure that we're prepared for the present as we're trying to modernize, and then truly give people the time to divest of all of that, and then truly give our people the predictability that they and their families deserve, so that, one, they can take care of each other, and then as we're doing all that, make sure that we're taking care of, in this case, our paratroopers. All that comes back to leaders being absolutely ruthless in their training management and making sure that that's where it actually hits. And it has to be ruthless prioritization. Just as the Force Comm commander says, we tell all of our battalion commanders all the time, if you cannot do the basics and take care of your people, stop doing what you're doing. Okay, and go back and make sure that you can do that. If you can't, then we're not going to have any lethal airborne brigades or any brigades. So that's it. And again, just appreciate the opportunity to talk to y'all. And I'll kick it back to Fort Benning.
Sir, thank you very much. Everybody stand by for further instructions.
We will now break for lunch. Reminder for those who are invited to attend the virtual infantry branch update and lunch. We convene this afternoon at 12:40.